Okay, we're live. Zok Tehillim Gemara. We're at the top of Daf Chof Beis Amud Aleph, and we're starting B'Shem Yisborach, the second parak of Yuma. Zok Tehillim Gemara. Zok Tehillim Mishnah. Bereshayna. In the beginning, call me. Sheroitz Alitroim as a Mizbeach Tayrim. There wasn't such a demand to do Trumas Hadeshin, so whoever wanted to do Trumas Hadeshin could have that opportunity. Who was Shimmer? What if there was a lot of people who wanted to be Tayrim? Rotzen, they would have a race. Rotzen, they would run. The Oilen Bekevish, and they would run up the ramp. Whoever reached first within 4 amas of the top of the kevish, zacha, he won. Let's hear Rashi. Call me sharoitz alitrim. Call koyin shahaya me'oisa beisav. Any koyin who was from that beisav, because of course you can't just come and do avodah every day. Each koyin had a specific day of the year where they were allowed to do avodah, but there were several or many kohanim on that day. So from that group of kohanim that day, if more than one want to do Trumas Hadeshin, they have this arrangement. And wants to do Trumas Hadeshin in the morning, terms allowed. They didn't have to have a raffle. Pious is a raffle. And the reason why pious means raffle is because if you have multiple people who want something and you need to somehow make peace between them, by making a raffle, everyone would feel that it was justified. So nobody will be upset that Reuven got it instead of Shimon, instead of Levi, because they all agreed that the raffle was fairly done and should be strong enough to award the prize to the person who won. So that's why a raffle is pious, because a raffle ends up making people content. And what if there's a lot of takers? This is how they solved the problem of who to give the schus to. 32 amas, so they had what we called a sprint, a dash, to see who can get up to the Mizbeach first. Whoever got within 4 amas on the top of the Mizbeach, that's where the finish line was. Zacha Litroim, he was Zacha to do the Trumas Hadeshin, the Zehu Goyrolim, and that is the Goyrol. So this Goyrol wasn't a Goyrol that we would say happens by chance. This was also a method of deciding who gets the schus, and that's why it was called a Goyrol. Zok to Gemara, but what happens in Hoyu Shneim Shopping? What if 2 people arrive and cross the finish line at exactly the same moment? When they arrive to the top of the Mizbeach, so Rashi here says a huge chiddush. What I would say is you take the 2 semi-finalists and then they have a girl in between them. They have a tiebreaker, like you have in championship sports. But that's not what Rashi says. Rashi says if 2 people tie, making it up, it invalidates the entire race. Neither of them get any schus. Now you totally disqualify the race, and everybody who was in the original pool, even those who for sure did not win the race, they're also going to get an equal chance in the goyal. How does the goyal work? The person who's in charge of making this goyal instructs all of the kohanim, and let's see the Mishnah back inside. Stick out a finger. What do people stick out? What do these kohanim stick out? 1 or 2 fingers, except ve'in moitzin agoydel b'mikdash. But you never use your thumb as one of those fingers. So let's see what Rashi says. Stick out your fingers. So what it looked like was the Memuna stood in the middle, and all those who were interested in participating in the avodah and participating in that pious surrounded him, made a circle around him, and put out their fingers. Kol echad yira etzpay will show his finger. Makifin, they surround the coin, the mamuna, and they stand in a circle. Boha mamuna, the person that's going to conduct the girl, to identify where he will start from, the noitel mitznefes me'al roishal echad with him. He takes the hat off the head of one of them. Umi menu payis maschal limonis. And when he counts for the payis, so we'll see exactly what he counted. It starts from the person whose hat was removed. And everyone sticks their finger out to be counted. And the Mamuna says, "Call Shamini Kalabai, who's like it's like ini mini mani mo," right? The person who ends the number when we count it, he's the one who's going to win. Umoitimi piv minion, and he announces a number that he's going to use, an arbitrary number, or mea or shishim. He picks a high number, which is harbe yoser mishayisham kayhanim, many more than there were kahanim there. So then, unless you were a professional card counter and a casino cheater, you wouldn't be able to figure out, quickly divide the number by the amount of kainim that's there, and then figure out what position you would have to be in to win the payas. That's someone is not going to do, and therefore it's relatively random. Who is number one? That's the person whose mitznefes was taken off. The soivev, the haylech, umayne, goes around and around. Twice, he counts the fingers. The bach sticks in. He goes around and around until he gets to the end of the number.
Shouldn't even know, even if he's a professional card counter.
So I'll for the next Rashi we'll see that's not the reason, but it's a good horror. But what is important is, why was it necessary? Rashi says that if there's only two people at the end, they're not the exclusive people in the girl. Now everybody's in the girl. Why is that? We were the two semi-finalists, so now we should be the girl. The Torah is because it'll be easy. If it's an even number that the Kohen picks, it'll be one of them. If it's an odd number, it'll be the other one. So there's no way to have a real girl because the Kohen knows where he's starting from this person. If he picks an even number, it's for sure going to be this person. If it's an odd number, it's for sure going to be that person. So by including everybody, it makes it more random. Oh, there was a shaila. Why don't you do the classic girl? The Achronim asked that shaila. Why don't you have a classic girl where you put a whole bunch of papers in, then pulls out a paper or something?
But you can't say that I'm not going to do a girl that will work and bring everybody in, because
the Achronim asked, what you could do is, let's say there's 100 people, have 100 pieces of paper, and have one piece of paper that says I'm the winner. So he said that doesn't work because whoever picks up the first paper might have the biggest chance of winning because he for sure has that paper in there. The second guy has a lesser chance of winning, so it's not 100% even. But why don't you have a paper with everyone's name in it and then pick out one guy's name? And I don't know, maybe that's too complicated. Start filling out names. But Chaim Tzvi asked, maybe that's why you can put out two fingers, because this way, even the person who's the Mamuna, even if he was a math whiz, he wouldn't be able to figure out who's going to end up, because he doesn't know who's going to put out one finger and who's going to put out two fingers. But that can't be, because the next Rashi says why you weren't allowed to put out your thumb for these gorillas. So first of all, why is it one or two fingers? Chaim Tzvi proposed an answer, but Rashi says the Gemara Porach Lala. The Gemara is going to ask why it's two fingers, but it can't be to fool the count, because the next line of the Mishnah is vein moitzina goydel b'mikdash. You're not allowed to put your thumb out. The Gemara mafarish mafnei moed. The Gemara explains the reason why you weren't allowed to use your thumb is because there were people who cheated by being able to assess in advance where the number would end up. Now, at the beginning, when they announced the number 400, that it would be hard for them to calculate where it would end up. But once they're getting down to the final 10, they can make a quick calculation. Okay, 10, we're up to the final 10, when the Muna gets up to the last number, it's going to be one past me. So how could I put an extra finger out that it should be me regardless? So Shikaya meaning Lechalas. if we're towards the end of the count, the Yabit, at that point, he'll be able to calculate where it's going to end. Then, this fellow who's going to miss it by one would put out two fingers in such a way where the Ramuna won't be able to tell that both the fingers are from the same person. So he should be counted as two people, and therefore, and therefore, he will be the final number rather than the person over it beside him. The counter can't focus on every finger that's in their house. He's just going around and around. And why is the thumb a problem versus any other finger? Your thumb and your pinky, you can make them pretty far apart that the kohen counting might not notice that it's from the same person. But two of the four fingers that are together, that they're close enough that it'll be pretty obvious that they're coming from the same hand. But the thumb with another finger could appear to look at two different people, and therefore it will ruin the girl or the pious. Story time. Once upon a time, so Yishneim Shovin V'Ratzin V'Olam B'Kedesh. This is before the time of the girl. There were two people that were the semi-finalists running up the mountain, and they each were excited to get there first, to be Zoicha, the mitzvah of Trumas Hadeshin. And what happened is V'Dochaf Echad Mehenes Chaveres. One of them pushed the other one. V'Nafal, and he fell. V'Nishbara Raglai, and his foot broke. So now they already saw that there's a potential danger here with this method of distributing the schos. Once Bezin saw that this could lead to tremendous danger, then they said no more, only with the pies. The shaila is, why didn't they do it l'chatchila? Why did they l'chatchila do it with running? If anyway, the second round was with the pies. I think that'll become clear in the Gemara. And then the Gemara says, then the Mishnah finishes off, is Arba Payasas Hayusham. There were 4 daily raffles to split up different groups of avodas. The Payas Rishon, the first payas that was made, distributed the Trumas Hadeshin and some other avodas that were connected to the Payas Rishon that we'll soon see. Arba Payas Hayusham, Dalit Pa'amim Bayoim, the stuff from the payas, they gathered 4 times a day. We learned Rashi earlier, why couldn't they do them all at once? And the answer is because we want to make a matzav. There should be a tumult. We want there to be action in the Beis Hamikdash. We learned yesterday that there was one of the 10 nisim that happened in the Beis Hamikdash, and actually the added nisim that the Brisa mentions happened in the city of Yerushalayim, is no one ever got injured from a nachash or an akron. Nobody ever got injured. So if there was such a nace that people didn't get injured, how is it that someone got injured running up the kevish in the Beis Hamikdash? If there was such a nace that people didn't get injured, why was there this problem? So one teretz I heard is people were injured and were bitten by scorpions and were bitten by snakes. They just nobody ever died because of it. But injuries, in fact, did occur. Zok to Gemara weiter. V'hav meikara, my time loyta kinu law abundant paisa. Why did they originally have this Olympic method of determining who's going to do the Trumas Hadeshin? Why wouldn't we do it originally with a pies? If anything, it's going to be skewered to the person who's in best shape. Why is it fair? What about us fat guys? Why don't we have an equal opportunity to be able to do the avodah? Zok to Gemara. Let's see Rashi. Vaha avoid the usual Trumas Hadeshin may kar kaidim shir takol b'mutzosam my time of the kidulay paisa kachal shar avoidus to mesisim, like all the other avoidus. All the other avoidus didn't start off with running up the kevish. Originally, they set up a pious to determine who does it. Why? By this avodah b'dafka did it involve a sprint? It's a nidan shekol chilas and a paisa. So we learned that all the other avoidus were originally with a pious. Zok to Gemara, I'll tell you why. Meikara Sover, originally Bezdin held, Rashi's Bezdin held. Even though avodah is lailahi, we know avodah is normally not done by night, it's done during the day. Trumas Hadeshin is done at the night. So clearly it's not what we would call a grade A avodah, it's more of a grade B avodah. Even though it's Laili, so Rashi, however, Hochshur Balaila, since it's kosher to the Tumas Adeshin by night, Lo Chashiva Lu Kaihanim. The Kaihanim won't respect this avoid as much. They probably won't be too many takers anyway, because it's not such a chashav avodah. So chances are it'll never be a problem. People will be able to work it out amongst themselves. Also, and if we made this girl, nobody's even going to come. So that's why they didn't make a girl out of it. But once they saw that there was demand for this avodah and many people came, and not only that, but also the sakana and the fact that we made a race to see who should win. Came to sakana, the kinul paisa, they were misakin that there should be a raffle. So you might ask, why is it that the very first time that they had this problem, why did they try the race method? It's a very racist policy. Why didn't they use the pice method originally? And we're going to soon see why. The Gemara is going to tell us that if it's random, no one's going to bother getting up in the middle of the night to come to do Tumas Adeshin on the chance that they'll win the raffle. But if I can run and get it, so then the people who were in shape felt that I have an edge, so that's why they would come. You're telling me that the Kohanim were not machshav the avodah, or the Bezdin at least thought that the Kohanim would not be the machshav the avodah because it's done by night. Well, what about Aktar Sevarim, which Rashi tells us who kosher kol alayla? There are a lot of makri Sevarim kol alayla, like we learned yesterday. With non gavi paisos to masnisim, we learned regarding the raffles that were done in the Beis Hamikdash. Mi mala Sevarim lekevish u'min lekevish mizbeach. One of the avodas that they were distributing through the pious was also an avodah that's done at night. Those are also avodas that are done at night. And with the kinula rabbanon paisa. And the first method of distribution was using the pious. Why didn't they have the attitude there as well that nobody's going to bother coming? Because that is a chashav avodah. It's soif avodah the imami. The Kravas Evarim starts by day as soon as the carbon was shechted and the dam was nizra. Sure, it lingers and it stretches out into the night, but it's starting. It's the end of the avodah of the day. Zok Rashi, Soif avodah yamami, so gamrai shall carbon shenishchet b'yayim and nisrata b'yayim. It's the finishing off of the process of the carbon that was an avodah of yayim. The kach cheshuva bein hakayanim lo v'lo v'lo. That's why it's worthy of the Kohanim coming to fight for that schus, because they looked at it like it was a chashav avodah, because it was really finishing off the carbon of the day. Tumas Adeshin is the very first avodah of the day, so it's weiter linked to the cheshivas of the day avodah because it kicks off the day. The Amar Rabbi Yochanan said, "Kiddush Yodav L'Tumas Adeshin." You need to make Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim when you come to do Avodah. So the Tumas Adeshin was done before Alois, was done in the middle of the night. If you made Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim for the purpose of doing the Tumas Adeshin, when daybreak arrives, L'Macher Ein Tzarech L'Kaddish, you don't have to make a new Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. Why? Shekvar Kiddush Mitchilas Avodah. Because you made Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim at the beginning of the Avodah. So clearly, this Brisa seems to be saying, or clearly Rabbi Yochanan seems to be saying, that the Tumas Adeshin is the beginning of the Avodah of the day, and that's why if you make Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim from the Tumas Adeshin, it's good for the day. Zok Rashi, the Macher Ein Tzarech L'Kaddish, Im Lo Yatzam in the Mikdash. Of course, that's only provided that he didn't leave the Beis Hamikdash. V'afilu Rebbe, even according to Rebbe, the Amar B'Shchitus Kochim, who said in Maseches Vachim, Lidim Elis Mekiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, that once even though I'm in the Beis Hamikdash, but if I remain through the night and I hit daybreak after Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, it's going to be a mafsik, and I have to do another Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. Moidu de Mekrois Gever at Safra Loi Pastalina. If you did your Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim before the rooster's call, yes, then when you hit the daybreak, your Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim from before daybreak expires. But once this Kriyas HaGever, even though it's before daybreak, once you made your original Kiddush after the Kriyas HaGever, that will remain in effect. That Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim will remain in effect until you leave the Azor. As an aside, you do see that Trumas Hadeshin is called the beginning of the Avodah of the day. So, why did the Chachamim feel that the Kohanim wouldn't be machshav that Avodah? So, Gemara, you're not really reading Rabbi Yochanan's words right. What Rabbi Yochanan said was, Ema shekfar kidesh mitchila la Avodah. Not that the Trumas Hadeshin is the beginning of the Avodah of the day. What Rabbi Yochanan is saying, since you originally made your Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim on behalf of an Avodah, not the Avodah that's beginning the day, but an independent Avodah. Since you've already made Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim on behalf of a Avodah, that remains in effect and in force until the end of the day. So Rashi Ema shekfar kidesh mitchila l'shem Avodah, but not that it's the beginning of the Avodah of the day. So now we have one shot as to the evolution of the process of how it came to be. So they originally didn't make a pies because they thought people wouldn't be interested. A lot of people started coming, and they still didn't make a pies because they thought maybe it was a fluke, so they had these races. But once the races posed a problem, they just transitioned into the standard pies which they had for the other avodas anyway. Ikadamri, there's another approach to how these evolved, that they should have this Goro. The Karasavar, originally the Bezin thought, even the Shina, since who wants to get up so early, it's dark outside, and to come to the Beis Mikdash so early, I want to sleep in a little bit. Lo Yasu, they thought people wouldn't come. But even the Chazu, the Asu, the Ka'asu Namil de Sakana, since they saw that not only are people getting up early to come, they're endangering themselves to benefit and to have the schos to do the avodah, takinu lo rabbanan paisa. So the reason why they thought that the kohanim wouldn't come is not because it's not a choshev avodah, it's an avodah slayla, but rather who wants to drag themselves out of bed. Even there's reason when they're in the Beis Hamikdash, but when they're in bed and they have to push the snooze, maybe they won't be such reason. Frank the Gemara, we don't find that the kohanim are ever concerned about losing sleep to do the avodah. They're eager to do the avodah even though they're going to lose sleep. If you want to be makar the Evarim, you have to stay there until all the Evarim are fully burnt, Rashi tells us. So therefore, you're also going to be giving up sleep, because the likelihood is, even though you might get your opportunity, you might be granted your schus late morning, but you're going to be stuck in the Beis Hamikdash till the wee hours of the morning, because you have to wait there until the meat is completely burned. So and nevertheless, for the Kinyan Rabban and Paisa, and the Rabbanon from day one set up a pies, meaning knew it would be in demand. So you see the Kohanim aren't concerned about losing sleep. And for the Gemara, it's something that every teenager would clearly understand. Shiny Mignam Mekem. It's very, very different. The ability to stay up late than the ability to get up early in the morning. Anyone would be asking to stay up late to be able to do the avodah. But once I go to sleep to get up in the morning early, that's a whole different story. Zokt the Heilige Rashi, Shiny Mikna.
Hard to believe, Yosy, that they get their opportunity to do the avodah once a year, maybe, right?
Yeah.
That's all right. And so, in over a 2-week period, you would think that they would be more eager because this is what they were. This is their job as Kehanim. So they're going to sleep in.
Your kasha now gives me an understanding of something I didn't understand. That the Kehanim only do avoid from 20 to 50. You're asking this kasha now. When you were 50, maybe you wouldn't have asked this kasha. Even those 2 weeks you want to sleep in. Now it's harder for us to understand. For 2 weeks, guy get up early. But I guess try saying that to youngin.
Well, there was reason that the Chazal testified that there was reason that they were eager to do the avodah.
Yeah, I heard. It's a very good art. It's hard to understand. You have once a year an opportunity to avoid it, because it's really the day once a year. It's not even like you said for 2 weeks. It's literally one day, because everybody's have a split up to Kayim. They're going to do it from one day. So you have one day to do the avodah, and that's going to be a problem to get up. I would assume they would be so excited they probably couldn't even fall asleep. So it's a good hurry. So shiny minute we make what Rashi says. A person would be happy to push off his sleep, not to go to sleep, rather than get up very early. She's man Trumas Hadeshin, which is when the time to do the Trumas Hadeshin is. So Tosis, that's a very interesting kasha. Taimali Frek Tosis. Amai loy Mishani, why didn't the Gemara answer? Very simple. The avoidus evarim of Dorim is ksher b'yoyim. The Trumas Hadeshin has to be done in the middle of the night. But the avodah of the evarim, of the makar of the evarim, that's kosher, you can do it by day. Ulakach the kinu rabbanon paisa, and that's why the rabbanon made originally pious to distribute that avodah. So people shouldn't fight over it. It's possible to win over the schus of being makar of the evarim and not have to stay up late. You could do it early. So that's why they made the pious. When the early Taisus, the shaper parchet, the good kasha, the kol mishamale very tamid, if you have the schus of bringing up the carbon tamid, shalbein arbayim, you kavish lemizbeach, if that was your schus, that you're going to put on the mizbeach, you can't just put it on the mizbeach and go home. No. He was mechuyev to wait there and stay awake all night long, until they're totally burned. Because we learned yesterday, or on Shabbos we learned, Shem Yivku Mi'al Mizbeach, if the Ivorim fall off the Mizbeach before they're fully burned, before Chatzos, Sheyachzirim L'Maracha, he's going to put them back on. And that's why the Gemara asks that this was also an avodah that's done at night. If you say at night, people, Kohanim don't want to do the avodah, they're not eager to do the avodah, so the Ivorim would be the same problem. People will not come to want to join that pious, because they know they're going to have to be awake. Sometimes even until Chatzos, they have to stay very late. In order to replace back on the flame pieces of meat, people of Ivarim from the carbon that might have fallen off from his back. But that's a good order. It's hard to imagine that the one day a year that you have the opportunity to do avodah, you wouldn't want to get up early. Zok to Gemara weiter. The Takanta Lahai Gisa. Are you telling me that Zok Rashi? Are you telling me that they made the pious because of this Takala Koshi? Takala She'ir and this kind of pious? Are you telling me that the reason why they set up a pious for the Trumas Hadeshin was because of this injury that occurred? Rather, the takana was not, the takana of pious was not because of the Trumas Hadeshin, it was for other avoiders. The reason why they made the pious is because of other avoiders that were linked to that same pious, which are Sidur HaMaracha and Shnei Gzirei Eitzim. Sha'atorim hu ha'mesader. The person who is zoiche to do Trumas Hadeshin, it comes along with additional bonuses, with additional avoiders. Even the kula and the kohen echad, since all of these avoiders are going to be done by one single kohen, the kohen that wins the merit of the Trumas Hadeshin, yesh kan avoiders cheshuvas linked to the Trumas Hadeshin are very prestigious avoiders, umikarbo pais, and from day one they would have always wanted a pious. So once again, how could you explain why originally it was not a pious and then it became a pious? The time we learned, the kohen who's zoiche to do Trumas Hadeshin, yizka b'sida maracha, he gets to set up the maracha, and he got to uv'shnei gzirei eitzim, he gets to bring the two cords of wood that are burnt on the mizbeach, shnei gzirei eitzim, shnei b'koyes eitzim, two cords of wood, aruchem kemidas roicha v'maracha, they were sized precisely to fit in the space where the maracha was, which is where they burnt the karbanis. The noise in the mal atzei maracha, he puts this wood on top of the existing wood on the maracha. We learned this avodah from pasuk. It says uvir Allah akain eitzim uvir ala mareches. He puts on the mareches eitzim are shnei gzir eitzim. The hakrab marecha mishtoi. The pasuk is talking about the marecha, which is the fire upon which they burnt their karbanos. Reisha the pasuk is va'esha al mizbech tukadboy. B'chol moikta shebe'inyan is lasha mareches madurhi. All of the moikta that the pasuk is referring to is talking about the fire, which is where they put this food. So if that's the case, you can't say that the Kohanim didn't respect this avodah. They wouldn't have come, because even if they wouldn't have come for the raffle of the Trumas edition, but those other avodah to come along with it, they surely would have come for. So therefore, Amar Abashi, let me tell you what it was. It really was in two stages. And Toshua says it wasn't necessarily in two stages, but the thought process was in two stages. Mikara Savar, Lo Yasu. At first I thought people would not come. Once, and why they thought they wouldn't come could be for the two reasons we learned earlier. It's about the Slayla, or he didn't want to get up early. Once the President saw that the kind of were coming, and also double the Sakana, Takinu La Paisa, they set it up as a raffle. But once they set it up as a raffle, even the Takinu La Paisa, Lo Yasu, people stopped coming. So originally, they did not conduct the Trumas Hadeshin to the other avodas, like the Shnei Gizer Eitzim. It was exclusive. It was an independent distribution of only the Trumas Hadeshin. So originally, they made a race, people came. When they stopped with the race, and it was just a raffle, no, people didn't bother to get up early. Amri, they said, what are the chances that I'm going to win the raffle? You know, you might buy a 649 if you're in the gas station anyway. But would you wake up at 4 a.m. to run to 7-Eleven to buy a 649? No, because the chances are so low, I'm not dragging myself out of bed for it. So because of that, the raffle didn't work. See, if it's a race, I guess a person might feel confident. I'm a good runner, I'll come. But if it's merely a raffle, I'm not going to schlep out in the middle of the night for it, because I might not win. So because of that, they needed to create an incentive for people to want to participate even in the raffle. So therefore, they jacked up the jackpot. By increasing the jackpot, it created more of an interest. And therefore, so people should come take the chance. They might not have woken up in the middle of the night to join the raffle if it was just a Trumas Edition. But once the Trumas Edition was packaged with other goodies, now there was an attraction to come. They didn't want to be betraying themselves to get up. Okay, so the raffle ended at 4 amas. Question: where exactly were these 4 amas? It's for sure not within 4 amas of the bottom of the ramp. That's surely not what the Mishnah means, because it says Rotzen va'olim bekevish tam. They went up the kevish. So clearly the finish line was not in front of the kevish, the finish line was on the ramp. Kamai sanami, it can't mean if you travel the first 4 amas up the ramp, that cannot be the finish line. So the finish line cannot be 4 amas from the beginning of the ramp, because it says Rotzen va'olim bekevish tam. They went all the way up. So it can't be referring to the bottom of the ramp. Even close to the bottom of the ramp cannot be what this race was about. So, and then whoever gets up there first, the Beni Namiloy, it also cannot be referring to some finish line that's somewhere halfway up the ramp or somewhere in the middle of the ramp. Why? The Yosy Simon Milsa. Then it's not clear cut. They didn't have a big red piece of masking tape running across to point out the line. It was done by knowing where it was. So somewhere in the middle wouldn't be a good place either. So pshitali, the gabe mizbeach. What it must mean is it's 4 amas from the top of the mizbeach, from the top of the kevish, which is the mizbeach. But where do I have a suffix? This is my suffix. We know that the mizbeach was wider at the bottom than it was at the top. At the bottom, it was a 32 amma square, but then there was an amma v'yesoi. So the base of the mizbeach was a 30 amma square. But in the middle of the mizbeach, middle of the height of the mizbeach, it got further narrowed, and there was another walk away around, which was an amma by amma. So by the time you got to the top of the mizbeach, it was a 28 amma square. It was a 28 amma square. So the question is, do you count 4 ammas from the top of the mizbeach, because the kevesh leaned over to reach the top of the mizbeach, or is it 4 amos from the bottom of the mizbeach? So boy papa, arba mishama bahad amma yisoid, was it within 4 amos of the yisoid, which would be 6 amos from the top surface of the mizbeach? Bahad amma yisoid amma soivim, oi maybe dilma bar my amma yisoid amma soivim, or maybe it was excluding that, and it was 4 amos. I'm sorry. So the first side that is 4 amos. The second side, Rashi says, Dilma, it's 4 amos from the floor of the mizbeach, which would be 6 amos from the top of the mizbeach. That's the question that the Sheshes had, where the finish line was. It was up to the Gemara. Teku, the Gemara blibes with the Teku as to where the end of the raffle was, where the end of the race was. Somebody has a shaila. 5 amos, it would be 6 amos because there's an amma of the yisoid and the amma of the soivim. So if you were standing at the edge of the yisoid, you were actually 2 amos from the top surface of the mizbeach. What happens if imahayu shnei mishavim? What if it was a tie? How mund amal meant to be? Tana we learned. Ha'tu etz by seichem. Stick out your fingers, lemini to count them. In fact, what do you need fingers for? Why do you have to give the guy a finger? Let him just count the people, and then you don't have a problem with fingers. Also, you're not allowed to count Klal Yisrael. Even for Dvar Mitzvah, the Chsivit says, Shaul counted Klal Yisrael by having each person take a broken shard and put it in a pile, and they counted the broken shards, but he wouldn't count the people themselves. So that's how you see that you're not allowed to count Klal Yisrael, even for Dvar Mitzvah. Matzkav lo Rabashi had a kasha. Listen to Mivzaku. Who said that this pasuk in the pasuk means it was a piece of cheres? Maybe he counted them by pointing to them themselves. But B'dilma Shmad Masu. Maybe when the pasuk says that he counted them in Bezek, doesn't mean he used shards to count them. It means the counting occurred in the city of Bezek. They found them in Bezek. So she was a city. And maybe all the pasuk is saying is that's where this counting occurred. Let's try a different pasuk. It says, "Vayishma Shalos Ha'am, Vayivkedim Betloim." He counted them by Tloim, and Rashi says the way he did it is Tzivam. He commanded them. Lakachas Kolachat Tlem Itoina Melech. He had a huge warehouse full of sheep, and he told everybody, "Go into my warehouse and take 1 sheep, and then take your sheep and put it into this big pen, and then Uvar LaMerchav and then they just counted the amount of sheep." Now that counting means that Shaul had to have a lot of sheep, which the Gemara is going to comment on. Amar Belazar. So this is where we know it from. We know it from the Tloim because there for sure, it was not a place. It was the way the counting was done. Amar Belazar. Kolamoynes Yisrael. Anybody who counts Klal Yisrael over Balav is over Alav. Shinemar. It says in the pasuk, and let's read the pasuk inside. It says V'haya Mispar B'nei Yisrael. It took a vowel. Mispar B'nei Yisrael. Kechaylayam will be like the sand on the beach. Ashalayima that should not be counted. Below Yisofer. So it says a lashon of lo yimad to tell you that you're over an alav. So it's not really alav because it's saying Klal will be so much it'll be impossible to count them. But it was a darshaning that there's a lo yimad you're not allowed to measure them. Because it says nemar lo yimad below Yisofer. It's both. So this actually poses an interesting shaila. What is the difference between yimad and Yisofer? Sofer means to count, meaning you count each person one by one. Yimad is a different type of measurement. It's also a measurement, but it's different. And how do you make a yimad? How do you make a midah? What you do is you take a room, for instance, just an example of how you can do it. You take a room and you fill it up with people. And you see how many people will fill the room. Let's say it's 100 people. And then, instead of counting a person one at a time, you keep on filling rooms with people, and you see how many rooms you can fill, and then you just multiply that number by 100. So that's also a way of knowing how many people there are, but you're not directly counting it. And the shaila here that the Achronim learn is the Machlokes between Belazar and the Bnei Yitzchak is if that's considered counting. If that method is considered counting. And it's Negea Lemaisa because there's actually a shaila, are you mekayim the mitzvah of Sir Sa'imer by writing it on the paper? Instead of saying Hayoim, Shisha, Shloshim Yoim, instead of saying that, what if I take a piece of paper and I write it down? So there are those who compare that to the Layimad, and in whether or not lo yimad is an isser to count, would it be considered Shvius Aimer by counting the same way? Yes.
So, if counting fingers is not counting people, then why did Shaul go to all of this trouble of counting sheep? Let them, or counting people in a room, counting rooms. Let them just count fingers. Put up your hand. We'll count your finger.
I heard something. I don't know if I heard it lagaba your kasha, but maybe we can apply it to your kasha. Shaul was counting all of Klal Yisrael. The counting by the pious was not counting all of Klal Yisrael. So how mehechatesi the halal from these psukim that it's also to count even a part of Klal Yisrael? So that was a kasha that I heard asked, and I don't remember the teretz to it. But the kasha I asked was, how could you bring me a raya that you can't count? You cannot count. You can't even make a pious with 10 kohanim from the fact that you're not allowed to count all of Klal Yisrael. So maybe it's not as chomer, and that's why they're able to count fingers. But
I also don't understand that. Why is a finger not part of a person? In other words, you can count heads just like you can count fingers.
I guess it's not as dangerous. It's not as dangerous if you're counting. Oh, Rabbi Elvin spoke out. It's also an aver that the chiyus of a person is not tolian. So counting head would be more serious because you're counting from an aver that without that aver, a person can't survive. A finger, sometimes a person can survive if they lose a finger.
So you can count arms also. So
I thought the reason why they put out fingers is because the guy who loses gives the guy a finger.
Yeah.
Because he's upset.
Okay, but what you want to say the answer is that when you're counting, the real Isser is only counting all of Klal Yisrael. So if you're counting a mute, then maybe you can count by fingers.
But we're makbid even further. Even when you count minions, we don't count people.
Right.
We're makbid not even to count.
Okay, we're makbid on all kinds of things.
I hear. Or another kasha they ask is, why do we bring this raya from Shaul? Why don't you bring a raya for the fact that to count Klal Yisrael to the mitzvah to count with Shkolim? That was also one of the kasha that I asked. The most obvious counting of Klal Yisrael we count with Shkolim. So why do we have to look for these?
That mitzvah was given. Wasn't that mitzvah given to David? That was after Shaul.
Well, no. Originally, it was given. We look at Shkolim was given in the Midbar. That really was to raise money.
That's the sense. Okay.
But these are the shouts that they talk about.
Well, they didn't want to part with their skull. I understand. They don't
I'll
get
give
to
you a
keep
finger.
the finger.
I'll give you a finger, but not a shekel. Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani, Rabbi Yonasan Rami. Rabbi Yonasan had a stira. He asked a kasha. A stira. Siv by Misper b'nei Yisrael b'kachayil hayam, which means it's a finite amount that's technically countable. Uchsiv asher lo yimid v'lo yisafar, that you can't count. So are we countable or are we not countable? This is when Klal Yisrael doing the Ratzon HaMakom, then we're not countable. But when we don't do the Ratzon HaMakom, then we're finite, and then we're counted. There are those who learn Punkt. When we're doing the Ratzon HaMakom, then Klal Yisrael is unified, and we're one. So therefore, we could be counted because we're only one. We're one unit. But when we're fragmented, that's when we can't be counted. Rabbi Omar, Misham Abba Yosef and the story Loy Kasha. When it says that we are finite, that's for the Rebbeinu Shalom. The Rebbeinu Shalom can count us, but a human can't count us. We're too many. When someone becomes a leader, Misashi becomes rich, and you see that by politicians all the time. They start off poor, and then suddenly, after they become a politician, they become rich, unless you're Trump. Where do you see that? When Shaul first counted Klal Yisrael, he had to use shards because he didn't have expensive tokens for each person to submit. But later on, he was able to have such a vast amount of tloim that he could use tloim to count them. Suddenly he became wealthy. Vidilma, who said he became wealthy by taking from Klal Yisrael? Maybe he was his own. Maybe he had his own wealth. So tomorrow, why would the Navi tell us that before he used this and then he used that? It must be to teach us that a person who's nismana to be a leader has to become wealthy, like we learned that Le'u Me'echav, the Kohen Gadol, you have to make him wealthy, they have to give him money. It says Vayor b'Nachal. The pasuk says that Shaul argued in the Nachal. Let's read the pasuk inside. V'yaveh Shaul ad ir Amalek Vayor b'Nachal. He argued b'Nachal. What does it mean? Amar Abmani al Iski Nachal. He was tumbling and learning understanding who Yarshins. The Shosham Lakadosh Baruch Hu Shol. Lech v'kisas Amalek. When Hakadosh Baruch Hu commanded Shol to destroy Amalek, which he wasn't able to do, Omar, he said, Uman nefesh achas. Madich, when it comes to Egla Rufa, where even one person dies, the Torah is so makbid on his life. Omar Torah Have Egla Rufa, you need to bring a whole, you have to have a whole process, and you have to bring a kapora. So calling the Foshish Halolu, the multitudes of people here from Amalek that you're commanding me to kill, Alachas Kama V'Kama. And even if Adam Chata, okay, the humans did Averis, but Behema Machata. Why would I destroy the animals? I can bring them as karbanis, like Shol even told Shmuel what I wanted to do. If the adults did Averis, Katana Machatu, Yotza Baskal Varmaloi, a Baskal came out and told Shol, Zanish Tazoy Frim, Al Tahi Tzadek Harbe, Zanish Tazoy Frim. Just do what I tell you to do, and then you'll be doing okay. I don't pay you to think. Al Tahi Tzadek Harbe, Val Taschacham Yoiser, just follow my instructions. And then when Shaul told Doig to kill out Noig Yirak Hayadim, suddenly there he wasn't so worried about the lives of all these people. So what did the Rebbeinu Shalom tell him? Soiv ata upag when he told Doig go and kill the Kahanim, Yota Baska V'Amaloi Alter Sharbe. Don't be such a big rusha. Don't be killing these people out. Amar Huna, Kama loichali b'loimargish garvra the Mori Saye. See how someone who the Rebbeinu Shalom who has his back, if the Rebbeinu has his back, you don't have to worry. Nothing will take you down. How do you see that? Shol ba'achas. Shol did one avera, but also like they took him out, and that is because he didn't kill Agag, and that's when Shmuel said that Hashem was memayis you. He became most to the Rebbeinu Shalom from being a king. And David did two major averos, and it did not cause him his undoing. Shol bachas mai, ma'isa dagag, that took him down. The noiv irak didn't show to another aver as well. He killed out the noiv irak hayanim. But ma'isa dagag sid nichamti kim lachti Shol. The oynish that Shol lost to Malchus was over the Agag story. It was not over the noiv irak hayanim story. What are David to Averis? Ma'ininu, the Uriah. There was the story of Uriah Chiti that he had him killed. Uda Hasasa, at the end of his life, he allowed Klai Yisrael to be counted, and it led to him a gefa. Well, Ikonami Masha de Basheva. What about the Masha of inappropriate relations with Basheva? Those were actually, he was punished for those. The Novi asked, after he did the Masha Basheva, he asked, what if a wealthy person takes away the sheep of a poor person and shechts it, destroying the livelihood of the poor person, and feeds it to his guests? So the Navi said that he should be, so David and Melech himself answered, someone did that? He should be killed, and he should pay back 4 times. And in fact, David got 4 punishments. Yeled, he lost his first child with Bathsheba. Amnon was killed by Absalom. Tamar was raped by Amnon, and Absalom, who rebelled against him. Tomorrow, Hasam Namu Ifrimine. Those were also he was also punished for. Yitin Hashem Dever Ba'am Minaboiker Ba'adis Moed. So he was also punished for the Maisa of the Hasasa. So Gemara weiter. Oh, I'm sorry. Hasam Namu Ifrimine Yitin Hashem Dever Ba'am Minaboiker. By this much, he was punished, but Hasam lo ifru mugafei. I'm sorry. So the Gemara asked, there also David was punished. What do you say David wasn't punished because Hashem had his back? You see, David was punished as well. But the Gemara Hasam lo ifru mugafei. David wasn't punished himself. Other people died, but his own goof didn't get punished. Hasam nami lo ifru mugafei. Over there also, he wasn't punished because he yelled Amnon, Tamar, and Absalom. There, his goof wasn't punished either. So the Gemara. In fact, you see, David was punished in his goof. David had tzaras for 6 months. Uparshu remained Sanhedrin, and because of that, the Sanhedrin stayed away from him. When the Stal came in Shechina, and he lost the Shechina from him. David davened to the Rebbeinu Shalom, Yeshuvu le'yireyecha, yoydi desecha. Your years come back to me, and those who know your Torah, the Sanhedrin, come back to me. What time is it already? Okay, we're running late. We better stop here, and Mitchell will be mamshich tomorrow. Shkoyach. Have a wonderful day.